what I want to do today is based on the Makaris that we have been learning this week, is go through three practical, if I can, three practical shilas, which are negated to the Isser of Maaseh Shabbos. Number one is a question of whether or not you can fly in a Jewish airline. El Al is now owned by a Shemer Torah Mitzvah, who's a big Baal Tzedakah, but it's a Jewish airline. All of us have been faced with this scheduling question of having to fly from America to Eretz Yisrael on Maaseh Shabbos and Yantiv, fly from Eretz Yisrael to America on Maaseh Shabbos and Yantiv. Everybody understands that if you get on a plane an hour and a half after Shabbos, 2 hours after Shabbos, this plane did not materialize out of nowhere. Somehow this plane had to be outfitted and be made ready for a Nasiya on Shabbos. The question is, can you do this in Eretz Yisrael? It's a Jewish airline owned by Jews, and there was a public company, not public company. Not going to go into that, which is a very complicated, high-level rabbinic discussion. If you need a heter, let's keep it down to the basic principles. Everybody understands that there was Hilchos Shabbos involved in running an airline, even if putatively the Heskem that developed over the last 25 years was that Allah is not Mechal Shabbos, and this took a huge amount of effort on behalf of those people who are charged with making sure that Shemir Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael is kept at a high level. It didn't happen by itself. And they were able to keep scheduling not to take place in Shabbos, but they weren't able to go down to the Pirtei Pratim. They couldn't usher every pilot who needs to fly a plane an hour and a half after Shabbos, but by FAA regulations has to come do pre-flight check-in, etc. before, and this would cause him to drive in Shabbos to come to the airport. They weren't able to usher the cleaning crews and the maintenance crews that need to check out an airliner before it flies. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen in 10 minutes. And Kenish Vartan Biznacher Benetam, Blazer would like. So what do? Is there a Isser fly on Matzei Shabbos? Is there a Maaseh Shabbos problem or not? So we know, Rabbi Sai, for those of you who have learned with us all week, it's easy. If not, I'll try to explain it succinctly, that there is Isser of Maaseh Shabbos, and Mavashal B'Shabbos made is Usser La'atzmai, and Machlek 3 and Machlek is Tanaim, and the Psak Halacha is that if you did it b'mezid, all these current modern day Shadis L'Chayra are being saved around malachais that were done b'mezid. Why? Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about mumarim l'chilul Shabbos, who are doing it mezid in the sense that they know it at Shabbos. We have time, we'll go into a little bit of a discussion, the macro discussion of Tinnik Shenishbas. They did know, what they don't know, but let's assume for our purposes now that they certainly knew with Shabbos, which puts them in the category of mezid. They know that from these annoying from Jews keep Shabbos, and unfortunately, Rachmana litzlan, they don't. So l'chayr, that's considered to be mezidin. So now we have a problem, because in the halacha that we have about Maaseh Shabbos, if it's been mezid for the person who actually did it, it's asur. However, in the table of the psak that we paskin, either like Rabbi Yehuda or like Rabbi Meir, there are a more kal approach of la'acherim. In the course of the learning this week, we came up with an important Magen Avraham which talks about a template for this halacha and Hilchos Bittul. In Yeridei Siman Tzadik Tes, there is a siman which talks about aser levatel isur lechatchila. You have a treif piece of meat, so it's batel b'shishim. So you'll say, okay, what's the problem? You tell your wife to go out and buy a lot of food, and you don't want to throw out whatever was treif, etc. You try to be mevatel isur lechatchila. This doesn't work. And mevatel isur lechatchila. The question is this just for the person who tried to do the bittul, or is it usher for everybody else, same as for the mevatel atzmai? The reason why this is important is because this is the template the Magen Avraham other place can use to understand what the scope of the isser of Maaseh Shabbos is, who it's chal on. In bittul, it's chal on everybody, not just the person who did it. It's chal on everybody that it was done for. Say the Paiskim Oibazai, the Magen Ram says it's also for everybody if it is done. If it's done. However, the Magen Ram says let's make a chiluk in our case between Amir al-Akum, which is a much more chamerdik gzeir rabbanan, because Chazal understood that nobody wants to really keep halachas Amir al-Akum properly, and therefore we have to be very machmer in the getter of a knas, and therefore we create something called b'chtei sheyasa. This does not apply, says the Magen Ram, to Jews, for several reasons. First of all, says the Magen Ram, it's a Mosid L'Shchicha. Second of all, who is going to do an Isser just because a Jew tells him to do something in Shabbos, he's not going to listen. And therefore, the possibilities of it actually happening are so much less that therefore they were not a geyser. And even to the Misha Nasa B'Shvilai, we were not geyser. However, there is a major caveat in this kula, and that is the Gelei Paiskim, starting with Rabbeinu Aksav Sefer in Preshburg, moving on through the Dairis into Poland, where the Marshav and the HaRav discussed it, and culminating in Eretz Yisrael. In 1937, the Stapler wrote a seminal tshuva in which they discuss the metzius of the modern day situation. The metzius of the modern day situation is that mumarim are doing the malacha. So what's the halachic status here of a mumar? So what's the question? The question is, as we mentioned earlier, from a simple analysis of the Gemaras, and this sugi is brought in many places in Shas, the Gemara is talking about hamevashel b'Shabbos. It seems to be a mikra, a mistake. Somebody put on the water on the stove, and that's what constitutes a shaygeg. Yesterday you heard from Rabbi Kalas, sophisticated svaris and misasek and shaygeg, and all the various levels as to what constitutes the mens rea of the action of what a person does. If it's amazing, he intended to do it, and he was amazing. There, Chazal, of course, treated much more severely. But what about a mummer? So the first question of a mummer, which is analytically similar to a cheresh v'katan, is brought up in the Pri Megadim in Shin Chaf Hei. Why in Shin Chaf Hei? Well, Shin Chaf Hei is one of the places where the Shulchan Aruch discusses Amir al-Akum, and one of the important halachic analysis in this sugya is to decide what the interplay between Amir al-Akum and Maaseh Shabbos by Yisrael is. Meaning that Amir al-Akum, as I mentioned earlier, according to the Paiskim, is much more chamor than a Maaseh Shabbos in the classical sense. Amir al-Akum Chazal needed to make knasais because people were nichshel in it, whereas when it comes to Maaseh Shabbos, we're in a way paradoxically more kal. I think we can close for the purposes of this shir because of the taping aspects of it. We can close everybody's boxes here, so maybe the audio, the video, and the screen sharing will be easier. I'm about to do some screen sharing, so do it if you wish to change the template. Okay, so the question here, Rabbi Sai, is the Pri Megadim. If you can scroll down here to page, I think it was page 6. The Pri Megadim has a discussion here about mumar, and the Pri Megadim is nistapek. He gives you the three reasons brought in the Tazan Magen Ram to tell you why Amir al-Akum is more chamor than the act of a Yisrael. However, when it comes to a mumar, he says, well, let's think about a mumar. So he says a mumar kol shekem b'mumar la'akum and bishul mumar me'atzim Yisrael b'meizid asur l'mishin is bashal b'shvilai le'shayach einad m'chaytav le'lai. What does he mean here? Magen Ram says that Amir al-Akum is more chamor because a Maaseh Shabbos is not a milsa d'shchicha. It's not going to happen. The person's not going to do it. Based on the principle, ein adam chaytav le'lai. A person's not going to do an avera if he doesn't have anything to gain from it. Says the Pri Megadim that a mumar has everything to gain from it. And go back to our bakery in Preshburg, our patisserie in Kruka, a place which is set up to use mumarim to be mechal Shabbos, a pundik, as it's in the Ksam Sefer, a restaurant, as it's in the other Chuvas, or a cement plant, in the case of the Kilis Yaakov. As I mentioned in the Achana Shir, the Stipler was asked by Yaakov Halpern, one of the founders of Zichron Moshe, the founder of Zichron Yaakov in Bnei Brak, Zichron Meir, sorry. The mayor in Zichron Meir is anybody named who it's named after. It's named after Rameir Shapira, Zichron Meir. Rav Vosner is the Rishiva of Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin. He was a Talmud of Rameir Shapira. And Zichron Meir, he was the Rav officially of that area of Bnei Brak called Zichron Meir. So Rav Halperin founded Zichron Meir, which includes also Kiryat HaYeshiva, famous mountain upon which the Panovich Rav built his Yeshiva L'Shem L'Seferis. And he needed cement to build all this stuff. And this was pre-Medina in 1937, and there was unfortunately, a cement plant which was open on Shabbos, run by Mumarim. And the Stipler was asked, is there any way to buy the malt, mem, lamed, tes, aka cement, which is used to build? And Rabbi Say, I would say this, Rabbi Dai said, if you're walking today in Bnei Brak, you're walking on cement somewhere that was produced by this plant. There's a bridge which takes you from Highway 4 into Bnei Brak. Who knows? Maybe there were Poyalim that used cement to build this bridge that was produced in Shabbos. A lot of us will see in a moment, the construction projects start to run into problems about construction on Shabbos, and this is a very vexing problem. The Stipler was asked whether or not you could use this cement, and the Stipler said, look at this Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim says that if it's a mummer, it's usser. Why? Because there's no heter of that he's not going to be chayt. Why? Because these people have set up a business, a cement plant, where it's very much in their favor and very much induced for them to be chayte, because they want to sell you cement. And they're mumarim. So there's no heter here that by mistake somebody put water on a stove, or even b'mezid, you put water on a stove and a one-time mikra. That's not what's going on here. We're talking about Ksav Sefer's restaurant, the pundik. We're talking about a business venture which is designed to be Chal Shabbos for Hesia on a steady basis. Said the Stipler, this Pri Megadim tells me it's usser. The moment is usser because the svara of not shchiach doesn't apply. The svara of einadim chayta v'leilai doesn't apply. Very much chayta v'yeshlai. He's making a good parnasa either through a salary or, in the case of the owner, through the revach, and therefore Avadi has an incentive to keep this going, and therefore you cannot be semich on this head. This the Stipler therefore wrote to back with Halpern, you got to find your cement somewhere else. Where exactly they found it, I don't know, but the end of the story had a happy ending because Hilchos Yaakov Simon Zion, Chelik Bey's early writing, this was written in 1937, 11 years before the Kum of the Medina. The Stipler says, I heard, he wrote this in 37, I heard, who knows under whose auspices the Chazara B'Tshuva took place, but the Stipler wrote, I heard, he says, Shamaiti, Shabale Beis HaCharesh Shavu B'Tshuva, V'Hifsiku L'Chal Shabbos. What a stirring thing. Way back in Tough Race Sadik Zion, stirring thing. To say that they were Mechal Shabbos because that's just the way it was done in those days. And then, because of the schus of the Chazanish and the Stipler, under whose auspices Bnei Brak was founded and built up, they stopped producing the cement in Shabbos, says the Stipler. You look here on the page is marked 7, on the bottom left, last 5 lines. He says, first of all, it's usser, saif davar, even if they bought the malt, but you can't use it. Malt is cement. Chatchili is zichur usser to use it. Then he says, look at this, what happens. B'Shem HaGesbarach in the last 6 lines. Yigdar Pertzei Amoi Basi Shabbos Parshvatim Ke'eshamati. This is an addendum to the tshuva apparently. Shabale Charoshis Hanal Shavu B'tshuva Tzikul Chal Shabbos Shalom Yisrael. The Minchas Yitzchak, Diane Weiss, was asked a question as to whether or not you can buy a newspaper that is produced by Chilonim. Rabbi say, this is obviously a question which is applicable all across the world, both in Eretz Yisrael, where it's produced by Memorim, and in Chutz La'aretz, where it's produced by Memorim. Are you allowed to buy this newspaper since it's printed on Shabbos? And the Maaseh Yitzchak struggles to find a heter for this. He cites the stipler as asering, and he says, I'm going to find you a little bit of a kula here, because there's a tshuva in the Maaseh of Ram. The Maaseh of Ram was the brother of. The Maaseh of Ram says that I have a different interpretation of the Pri Megadim. He doesn't say this Lumasa Stipler was his, he was for the Stipler, contemporary Stipler. He just says, looking at the Pri Megadim, I'm not so sure that the Pri Megadim assered in a blanket way. Maybe the Pri Megadim only assered in a case where B'kvias you are baking for a specific person. So you are baking for the person who ordered it. But if it's just being done on a general basis, maybe not. There are complicated questions here, which we don't have time to go into. But the Maaseh of Ram al Kapanim, you see, there are the words of the Minchas Yitzchak, Mashmois Darshin. There's two possible ways of interpreting this Pri Megadim. One way is the way the Stipler interpreted, that it's just usher under all circumstances. The cement is cement, whether or not you ordered it. You needed to build a building, you ordered the cement, Zichur Usher if it was produced in Shabbos. You didn't order it specifically, but you went in and bought it because it was produced in Shabbos. The Stipler says, yeah, but Usher, Chil Hashem to be Machzik B'dei, these Ivrei Aveira. The Maaseh Ram says it depends. If you ordered it, then it was Nasa B'Shvilai. The Pri Megadim will tell you that a mummer who produces something, it was Nasa B'Shvilai, it's Usher. But it was just put into inventory. Efshanis says the Minchas Yitzchak, I'm not going to go into the antecedent question of whether you're allowed to read these newspapers in the first place. There's a very sharp Musa Vartir at the beginning of this tshuva says, Ve'etach can give him a heter to read Kvidah newspapers, which are mulai. What's the word he uses? Mulai, Kvira, Taiva, Hamarilim, and Neshama. But I wasn't asked about this. But the Menishka fact in the first paragraph, the Menishka fact, Menishka fact, if you're allowed to read the newspaper. He asked me if there's a Maaseh Shabbos issue, cites the Stipler, he cites the Maaseh Ram, and he comes up with a bifurcation between a regular subscriber, that's clearly Nasa B'Shvilai, because the newspaper was printed to give the Yanko his newspaper, and therefore, since it was produced by Mimarim L'Chalei Shabbos, a reading of the Pri Megadim under even the most kulitic way would tell you that it is Aser. However, the Maaseh of Ram understood in the Kavanah of the Pri Megadim, it was only if it was a specific tivui. So if you subscribe to this newspaper and you want your newspaper on Shabbos, and it was printed Friday night, as newspapers are printed, then you got a problem because you told him to do a malach on Shabbos. You let to read the New York Times on Shabbos. These are mumarim, the Shira Chazanish. Everybody knows that. And they print it on Friday night and they deliver it. You let to read the New York Times on Shabbos. According to this, you're not allowed to have a subscription. You're walking by in your lobby and the other guy's newspaper is sitting there. Are you allowed to look at it? Maybe. Because even though it was produced a reading of the Pri Megadim al Peter Maaseh Ram, which means that it was not necessarily produced b'shvilcha, that yes. Now he points out the obvious that in America it's Ray Vacuum, so it's by Goyim, but I don't know. I sound a little bit like Callus. I'm going to try to catch in three major issues here. Who owns the New York Times that I used to as a marshal? A public company? Is it owned? Is it controlled? Class A shareholders, Class B shareholders? One day we'll do Yerchakal talking about various Mishpat ownerships. Not for now. I only brought this up as an example, but it's pashut, yes, that these problems are more chamor in Eretz Yisrael, where there are more mumarim possibly owning and doing avodah than it is in America. So Rav Dynamite's passes Ladina that if it was darker lahatris for anybody, Chol Mishiyartza, then it's usher because it was made for everybody. If it was a subscription magazine thing, and the subscriber is usher, maybe other people are mutter. A little bit of a possible window leheter, but basically l'chumra. Which brings us now back to our El Al flight. So the El Al flight, what's the heter for the El Al flight? So you need to look for a way around the stipler because Maaseh Shabbos is being done here. Maaseh Shabbos is being done in Maaseh. It's being done. You bought a ticket, so it's being done arguably for you. Who says you're allowed to be nene from this Maaseh Shabbos? So one way leheter here is the Chai Adam. Chai Adam is brought in the it's also brought in the Bir Alacha. Let's see it inside here for a second. Go back to the Chai Adam. Brought here on page 4. Where the Chai Adam says, Dafke b'davar shenaseh shinui b'guf hadavar. B'guf hadavar. You created a Maaseh Shabbos where there was an actual shinui in the chayfetz. Page 4, please. A shinui in the chayfetz. Guys, are we going to move it back here to page 4 so we can see the Bir Alacha inside? There we go. On the bottom right. The dafka b'davar shenaseh. You got to use the red one because it's already yellowed. Das b'davar shenaseh b'guf hadavar. Shenishtanem b'kamei shahaya. B'vashal kiyaytze b'zeh. Aval mitzim reshus l'shus. If you're being mitzvah reshus l'shus, it was my trusty pen. You took the pen and you moved it from reshus yach to reshus rav. You chayav and Shabbos, unfortunately, you were amazing. But there was no shinui b'guf hadavar. Is this considered to be Maaseh Shabbos? Chai Adam calls this a second degree Maaseh Shabbos. It's not a shinui b'guf hadavar. Chai Adam, as cited by the Bir Alacha, says, even though I'm going to give you a bigger kula on this case, and therefore in the machlekes between Rabbi Meir and Yehuda, Rabbi Meir is make the most, and Rabbi Yehuda is a little bit more machmer, and generally the Mechara Pasuk like Rabbi Yehuda and the Gaon Pasuk Rabbi Meir says Chai Adam, even though my mechutin is Meko at Rabbi Meir, I'm going to tell you that's for sure in a case where there was no shinu in a guf hadavar. There's no shinu in the guf hadavar because nothing was changed. Now everybody say, let's speculate about shinui b'guf hadavar when you are flying on a airplane. Was the fact that the airplane was cleaned, serviced, maintenance checked. Let's go a little bit derivatively into 2 or 3 steps further than this. The crew showed up in Shabbos. Is this create a Isser, a Maaseh Shabbos in that? So the Achrayim discussed this post the Chai Adam, the Tveres Yisrael contemporary in his Hakdamat al Shabbos called the Kelkelas Shabbos. They say clearly that the same svara. It's something where there's no shinui b'guf hadavar. There's no Isser of Maaseh Shabbos. However, the application here now gets a little bit tricky. Is there a shinui b'guf of this airplane or not? Because if there isn't, then yesh l'cha lismaycha l'chai adam, even though the Chai Adam says toiv lahachmir, and Rabbi say I don't paskin Shilas here at all, and certainly not in this forum, but maybe that would be the case. Maybe not to take this Mitzvah Shabbos flight that I have been on numerous times. But first of all, you need to know whether you can do it at all before you get to the Chai Adam. According to the Chai Adam, the Chayra, it would be mutter because there's no Chayra, no shinui in the guf of the matus, which is near la'ayin. The only thing that's changed that now it's royu to fly. Okay, everybody say this is already the application of principles to the mitzvahs of halacha, which is what Gedela Paiskim do. And there you have to understand, we have to speculate. And I only found one truth on this from Rav Nassim Artner, who was the Rav Rashi of Lud. He wrote a sefer called Yad Nasan. And if you look at Neitzah Chachma, you can find it. It's in the Chelik Beis. Yud Aleph. It makes sense that he, as the Rav of Lud, for obvious reasons, would address the question. Somebody's on the line. If you can kindly mute it. And the Rabbi Ortner in his Sefer says, we seem to have an audio issue here. Rabbi Ortner in his Sefer says, based on this Chayei Adam, I'm going to paskin that there was no shinui done in the guf of the matos. Says it's even more kal, arguably, than a pen. Why? Because a pen, which moved from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, there was no shinu in the guf chayfetz, but at least looking at it, the guy looking for the pen in the Rosh Hashanah won't find it. He'll have to go to the Rosh Hashanah to find it. Something happened here. It was moved from Rosh Hashanah. The plane, if you're looking at it, the same nice El Al plane before and after. Inside the cabin crew, the cleaning crew cleaned it up and it's made pristine and it smells nice and everybody has a mask. He says that's not a shinu in guf chayfetz because it's k'may shahaya. Somebody asked me yesterday, last night, I was learning with my own here, based on the Minchas Yitzchak, the Shayl in the Minchas Yitzchak, in the Egged bus, Minchas Yitzchak would ask whether you're allowed to take a bus immediately on Matzai Shabbos that left the depot on Shabbos. Not a lot of cleaning takes place, I don't think, on an Egged bus. By the time, when it leaves the depot, maybe, who knows, maybe yes, until it gets here. So I don't know about that aspect of Shabbos, but it drove on Shabbos to get to your stop in Romema. You're allowed to get on this bus or not. And Daniel goes through the sugya. He's not too happy about it. The Shayel, interesting enough, wanted to tell him that there's a shinu in the gufa chayfetz to the fact that the gasoline that was used to move the bus from the depot to your stop was consumed. And maybe that's a shinu in gufa chayfetz, and Daniel dismisses this. So the elam that I was learning with didn't want to dismiss this because the plane prior to the takeoff is filled with fuel, and maybe this is somehow a shinu the guf of the chayfetz that the fuel tank was empty, and now the fuel tank was pumped up on Shabbos. We went back and forth whether any Suri Deraisa were involved, opening up the question of whether electricity is an Suri Deraisa or not, because obviously an electric pump has to be used to get fuel into a tank. These are all by side. I leave to you to speculate. These are dakistic svaris, but the tshuva that I found in this Nasan Nems on, this is not necessarily a shinu the gufa chayfetz and yesh lahakol based on the chayad. He then goes into the question which you always have to have here, and as the Stipler did in the cement question, the Nesher cement plant, I think, in Bnei Brak, in addition to the Isser of Maaseh Shabbos, of course, is Lifnei Iver and Mesayel Oiver Aveira. So we're going to go through a discussion as to whether or not our tickets, Haredi tickets, are being Mesayea to allow to do this, because Lule, the fact that we buy tickets, they wouldn't have a flight at that time, and maybe is that sufficient to create the Lifnei Iver Shaila? And he says maybe not, because there's certainly Goyim or Yudim Ein Hashem Ritzis that are going to travel anyway, so it's hard to pin this flight on you. If anything, from Jews, try to get the flights to be pushed later because they need to get to the airport after Shabbos, after the Nachar Time, as Rav Lezer would say, and therefore it's hard to pin this scheduling on us, but this is certainly a question. And he says when it comes to with Neiver, maybe not, but when it comes to Mesayea, Ivra Aveira, also is a question. Here, L'chayr is Mesayea there very requires a siyua direct to the Gufa Chayfetz. I'm not going to go into this in detail now because it's a little bit off site here. And he says here there's no siyua. The Gufa Chayfetz is mutter. Yes, is shaila to Rav Yashiv. And Rav Yashiv said, understandably enough, but yeah, but I can't answer this because yes, the Lismaich and the Chayadim and Rav Yashiv seem to have agreed that cleaning and fueling and readying an airplane is not a Maaseh Shabbos. But Rav Yashiv, and this is all Mechlisheni, this is a very chashuv paisik quoting Rav Yashiv, so you can decide whether you want to believe it or not. It's not written in Rav Yashiv's direct writings, but he says Rav Yashiv said, "L'chatchila lo yiroylu n'say batisa zu." Based on this svara, if we all don't come on this flight, it won't schedule such a flight. And therefore, it's not bar of Shaykh to say this is a vadayis that they'll fly anyway. Not sure if that's the real world Metzias, because if face when we go to Eretz Yisrael with our Yachakala crew and the 300 people, 400 people come, it's diffused over a whole bunch of airlines, different scheduling. It's hard to say that any one specific schedule is there for us, and if we don't go, this flight won't be scheduled. I don't know, but this is Rav Yashiv's psak ikra din it's mutter. But if you have a choice, but you have it, you should not be going on such a place. Then he concludes with raising another question: what about the food? So the food, which were prepared for Shabbos, but it may have been prepared by Hilchos Shabbos. Maybe it was cooked on Shabbos for a Maaseh Shabbos flight. So here we have a problem, going back to the previous understanding of the Pri Megadim, that was it made b'shviloi or not, and if it's such a case, maybe, according to the stringent disciples' understanding of the Pri Megadim, it was cooked because you ordered a ticket, they cooked you the food, even though, of course, they did not say, Rabbi Yankel, this is your manah, even though, interestingly enough, I was thinking about this, when it shows up at your seat, it has your name on it, right? The students come around with a list of who ordered a special kosher, and they give it to you. So maybe it was clearly not some shvilai. Okay, these are already dakas as far as, but is this a tikkun beguf hadavar or not? Yes, ladna in this, and this is also something which you have to think about. So Akan part A. Part B is a even more vexing shiloh. As you know, in the last 20 years, a lot of construction took place in Eretz Yisrael. I'm going to take two things. I will try to catch in, if possible, in the next 25, 30 minutes, two shilohs. One is a shiloh about construction and whether one is allowed to use public works that were built on Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael. And the second, if I have time at the end, another interesting Maaseh Shabbos question about masks that were brought to shuls. I saw this with my own eyes on Shabbos during the height of the pandemic. So shiloh number one. In the last 20 years, there have been two huge major construction projects in Eretz Yisrael that everybody knows about, and have been all over the newspapers. First was the building of the train, the Rakevet, the intercity train system, which now is finally coming into, after years of delays. You wonder if not Min Hashemayim, they were niknas on their delays and their cost overruns of the Arbet of Shabbos. They dug up, here we go, they dug up half of Eretz Yisrael. This is the pretty pictures. You got to show the pictures of the minaharot, the caves and the tunnels that they dug through. And because of traffic control issues, they claimed they had to work at Shabbos. So Achenu B'nai Yisrael, HaRav, worked very hard at trying to prevent this and didn't work out too well. There were various negotiations with the governments, negotiations with the governments over the years to try to invite the Hilchos Shabbos. One of the things that was agreed upon is that they would try, if possible, to use Goyish Payalim. Now, is this a perfect solution? Of course not, because all you're doing is moving from Hilchos Shabbos, like David for about Jews. You're moving away from Maaseh Shabbos and you're moving into Amir al-Akum. So you didn't really fardin much. In a way, it could be more chomer, because we said earlier, Amir al-Akum could be even more chomer. But let's yesh ladain on this shiloh. So, as we mentioned earlier, the Ksaf Sefer in Siman Nun Asers, the tafshel of a mummer who keeps his, let's take the pictures of the trains down, who keeps his pundik open on Shabbos B'Kvias, and he says, Dafke, if it was done b'mikra echad, even if it was done with Deitler at Sinai, we're not chayshinan, as the Magen Avraham says, that he's going to tell it to another person, because lai yishmalai, ein adam chaytav lai, and it's not shchiach, and ki hai gavna lai kansu. But didn't Lefanenu, the patisserie, the bakery in Preshburg that was open on Shabbos, I'm assuming it's Preshburg, probably not. So if was writing this to somebody, so I don't know where it was, but Al Kapanim, it was owned by Jews who are Mumarim, they were Machal Shabbos, and this is the Parnasa of the Pundik Tamid B'chel the Shabbos. It's Aser, both for the person who cooked it, and it's Aser L'misha Nizbashel Bishvilam. Because of this, they're not going to be Chaydel of Shaya, they're eating on Shabbos themselves. Doesn't matter. We have only the Knas of Chachamim Le'eser to the Mevashel B'mezid La'ilam, and from there, it says Ksaf Sefer, because he's a mummer, it's usher for everybody, Shenes Bashel Bishvilai, with his idea and his with Ratzain, because it's certainly possible they'll tell him do it again. He'll listen. He has a bakery. It's open on Shabbos. You order the cake, you order the food, you order it again, and therefore it says for Usser. The Stipler, writing 100 years later, in 1937, in Nabrak, in the aforementioned cement plant, says it's Usser to buy from them. And if you say to the Mummer, the Svar, the Prima Gadam Lahako, it doesn't apply here because they're running a business, as I mentioned earlier. And therefore, the cement is Usser Oila Miss. The Mishan is Bashel Bishvilai. Do not buy this cement. This is followed up by the Mechitzchak and the Maaseh HaRav that I mentioned earlier. Therefore, we have a big problem here. From all this, we seem to have an issue here, according to Ksav Sefer and the Hilchos Yaakov, and maybe even according to the Maaseh HaRav, those parts of the track, of the Rekevet, tunnel that were built by Mumarin, Mechalei, Shabbos, okay, Rav Nachman was giving you Matthias questions. The kosher caterers, yes, maybe, but I don't know. When is it heated? When is it brought? I'm not a mumcha enough in the preparation of the food that ends up on a flight to Shabbos to know the exact details. Maybe I should before I discuss the Barabim, but in the tshuva of the Yad Nasan, he discusses this, so I only mention it agav what he says. Okay, so back to this Rabbi Sai. According to Ksav Sefer and the Hilchos Yaakov, we got a big problem here because the Rakevet was built for everybody, and it was built for us too. And according to them, it should be Asr La'olam. Clearly, according to the Ksav Sefer and the Stipler, maybe according to the Maaseh Avram, it's only Asr B'Kleish Yaso because it was not necessarily built specifically for you. What's B'Kleish Yasa at a major construction project? Big problem, Rabbi say. Basically, struggle with this. What's B'Kleish Yasa? Let's assume at the moment B'Kleish Yasa is that amount of time that you would be able to travel on this Rekevet, if not for the fact that it was built on Shabbos. Meaning, you'd have to wait a number of days that is equal to the amount of days that they built it on Shabbos. Who knows? How could anybody calculate this? This is a big problem that the contemporary poskim have to deal with. So Rabbi Sai, I think it's reasonably clear to assume that the job of the Gedalia poskim, throughout Mikadmas to Noah, after the Neisa Kalim, Chamsvi, Yehuda, Rechuveger, when faced with serious halachic problems, they needed to analyze it so you can see how we live on a day-to-day basis. They wouldn't give us chas v'shalom an inch of kulas that wasn't warranted of a ruach kacham. So the same thing is happening today. What do? We have a train now in Eretz Yisrael, now in Yerushalayim, as you know. As I said earlier, the three major construction projects were the intercity trains and the Tel Aviv subway, which is not in operation now, but is being built now, and the building takes place in Shabbos. The deal the Haredi Chakim worked out is to try to use as many Goyah Shapayalim as they can, but Rabbi Say, I'll leave it to your imagination as to whether or not there were any Chilul Shabbos here at all. So how do we find a heter here to take the train? How do you find a heter to take the tram in Yerushalayim? It's being built in front of your nose in various places on Shabbos. If you take a stroll down 2 years ago, down that's the name of the big street which goes to Kever Rachel, you'll see they were building it, and on Rachel, Herzl, etc., etc. Unfortunately, there was Chilul Shabbos involved. So we need to find a heter for this. So then the Chanashir I mentioned to the Olam, I'm going to give you, in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to give you 4 heterim as explicated by Gedalia Poskin. The first is built on a tshuva of Rabbeinu Igros Moshe. 7 Chashuv Yidden got together to build something. I don't know whether it was an apartment building in Deal or something in Brooklyn, and they made a Tanai with the contractor who was Jewish that he will not build on Shabbos. The contractor was, in the words of Rabbi Moshe, Russia. It's not here. No, we don't have the tshuva here. There it is. Okay, it was a Russia, and he violated the deal. He promised not to do it. It wasn't oral, it wasn't in writing. Maybe it would have been writing, it wouldn't have made a difference anyway. And b'seifa shel davar, it was built through goyish apayilim, true, schirayim, against the macha of the owners. Is it mutter or not? The Moshe answers, even in a kabbalah of Yisrael, who's chashud, the Maaseh, the owners, the balabayas, were not over any iser, because the workers, the goyish workers, were not schirim of the owners. There was a contractor in the middle. There was a kablan in the middle. And therefore, it's not considered to be the malacha of the balabas. And in fact, they didn't even know the guy was building on Shabbos. It wasn't under their nose. It wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't the same neighborhood. The Tzias here, as often in the case of Tuvas, is not 100% spelled out, but I'm sure there are people around who still know this story because the names of the people are identified. And Ramesh says, they didn't know about it. The owners didn't know about it. It's not their work. The malacha is not theirs. The only thing that is more chomer here are serious problems of Lifnei Iver. Okay, says Ramesh, it could be there's no Lifnei Iver here. When you are masneh specifically with someone, do not work on Shabbos, and the guy goes ahead and does it anyway, maybe there's no Lifnei Iver. Maybe if you knew it's a haram or something like that, it's different. But in general, if you're a masneh, and this is a svara of Rabbeinu Amayra Gaila, which this is what Ramesh does. It comes up with a very solid svara, because you are not mechuyev to think that the Jewish contractor is going to be over when you told them specifically not to do it. You'll say, but the Mitzias, he was over Lifnei Iver, so therefore, maybe it should have been Masik Das, the guy wouldn't keep his tonight. No. Says Ramesh, I can't ask you to live in this building because of a possible violation of Lifnei Iver, and Lamaisa says, Ramesh, you're allowed to live there. If that's the case, at the end of the day, let's decide whether this truth is applicable to the trade. Ramesh was matter to live in a house that was built through a Kabbalan Yehudi that was seicher non-Jewish payalim to build it, which seems to be the case here. And with the trade, the Medina was a Kabbalan, and they were seicher. Supposedly, they were seicher. This they did do. They got a whole bunch of workers from Thailand, as you know. They're all over to build this, to build the trade. So the template is pretty similar to this Tshuva Chele Gimel. They didn't keep it. Maybe in the case of Eretz Yisrael, he also told them not to work on Shabbos. And Ramesh says that it's mutter. Is this applicable directly here? Not sure. Because there was a clear Tanai, not written down, but at least explicated orally, telling them not to work on Shabbos. Maybe here, the Unzra Charedim knew that the Medina would be working at Shabbos because they announced it. Chalam Be'eda. Every single Friday there were notices in the Chilani press about which streets would be closed because for traffic control purposes, and this is certainly true in Chutz La'aretz too. A lot of the work is done on Shabbos for obvious reasons. So is Ramesh's true but directly applicable here? Not sure. I'm not sure. There are those who would like to use this as a heter, but there are Metzias differences based on the fact that in that tshuva, Ramesh is stomach in the fact that they told him not to work on Shabbos. Here too, and this is a little bit murky, in the coalition agreement back in the I forget when, the 90s, and when Yadis HaTorah joined the government, which, as you all know, gets formed every couple of months in Eretz Yisrael, LP coalition agreements. They wrote into the coalition agreement that there would be no Chil Shabbos B'far Hesia, including the trade. Okay, the Misrad Tachbura, similar to the Ramesh's Kabbalan, did not keep this tonight, and they worked in Shabbos, and therefore maybe Ramesh's Tshuva, which you're allowed to live in the apartment, controls because you did what you could, and therefore we're allowed to use this train. That's one smach leheter. Second possible smach leheter is a macro shaila of who are these mumarim that are being over in Shabbos and building these big construction problems. Do they possibly have halacha of tenich and nishma? So this is a big problem here. The halacha of Tanik Shenishba goes all the way back to the Binyan Tzion, Choner, who writing in the first sprouting Rachmala, son of the Reform and Journey, famous tshuva, he says that Mechale Shabbos before Hesia in the late 1700s, early 1800s in Germany were Tanik Shenishbais, because they were angechapt by in a scholar. Their parents decided to send them to the gymnasium and not to the yeshiva, and that took them into the gather of Anusim. This is a major discussion. The Paiskim, the Chaznish, says all of those people who are called Chilainim Bismanenu have the halacha of Tanik Shenishba, Bikula, the Chaznish, and in Yardea, famous dictator Chaznish in Yardea, Simon Aleph, Siv Katan Vav, the Chaznish said that Tanik Shenishba has a Dinai Ki Yisrael, and his Shchita is mutter. He's not a mummer. Why? Because he's a chazaka. This is the lesson of the Chaznish said, if you would tell him and you'd be mishtadel with him and you talk to him and you get him to understand, he would not be Iber B'mezid and he would do it b'tshuva. Chaznish repeats this in Yeridea, several places in Yeridea and in Archaim. However, writing in the Dar afterwards, Mar Rabbeinu Bal Mincha Shleimer, Shlomo Zalman disagreed with this. The Matthias Ner Yisrael had changed. And if you look around, maybe the Chaznish was writing in the 40s with the first, Chalutzim or whatever. But by the time Shlomo Zalman was writing in the 70s, the Matthias had changed. 60s and 70s. In Shulchan Shleima, it's not in the Mincha Shleima. Everybody knows this is a famous psak of Shlomo Zalman. There is no Tanik Shenishba Bismanenu. Everybody knows that there is such a thing as from Jews. Everybody knows that there's such a thing as Shabbos. If you choose to be Mechal Shabbos today, unfortunately, whether you're in a kibbutz or you're in Tel Aviv, you're doing it despite the fact that you could have known, you could have learned, you could have kept Shabbos, and therefore it's not possible to call this a Tanik Shenishba. His Mechutin, Rabbi Yashiv, felt the same way. Again, it's not in his Piska, not in his Sefer of Tuvas, but it's brought in his name, the Pia Shmua, that Bismanenu. If your question was, are you allowed to be Mazmin, invite Kroivim, Chal Shabbos to a Sudis Yantif? So he says, in that case, where they're Tanik Shenishba, it's mutter, because they have no din of mummer. However, I can't paskin to you that everybody is a Tanik Shenishba. Rav Yashiv has a famous psak in which he said that the Rusim are Tanik Shenishba. When the Russians started emigrating to Israel in the 80s and culminating in the end of the day of 1 million Russians came, so the Russian Jews, courtesy of Stalin Yamach Shemai, whose entire neshama was to uproot Yiddishkeit, as you know, that's what communism was about. So they had a halacha of Tanik Shenishbas, but otherwise, Rabbi Yashiv did not allow Tanik Shenishbas to be used as a heter in Eretz Yisrael. If you were growing up in the 70s in Tel Aviv, you could have gone to Chinuch Atzmai school. You chose to go to a Chaladi school. That's not a Tanik Shenishba. Okay. So an afkamina would be L'gavi Maaseh Shabbos. Those Chilanim would taka Tanik Shenishbas, which they knew nothing. Russians, maybe they're Anusim, or maybe they're Misaskims, it was heard yesterday, and there's no Yisrael Maaseh Shabbos. Because Manenu, this is a hard heter to use, even though the Chaznish allows it, but this prong of a heter is a little shaky. We can use tarif it perhaps, but not necessarily to use as a heter. Possible heter number 3. As you know, the Bir Halacha in the beginning of Shni Ches says that a major exception to the psak that b'shoigig is mutter binena of Mitzvah Shabbos is, and let's go back to the Bir Halacha that I showed you earlier. It's on page, if I can find it for me, the Naitea b'Shabbos. It's on page 4, valid. A major exception. If you are Naitea on Shabbos, you planted something on Shabbos, to wit that it doesn't come out right away, you're mechoyev to be Eiker in the Tia. It's in the bottom of page 4 right there where it's purple. It says, Zeh b'chola mulachas. Da, it says, and b'naitea b'Shabbos udin b'zireya, b'lav achay nechan s'arter shaykh of l'mezid, tzarech la'akar h'natia. Rabbi Sai. If that's the case, we have a big problem here. Because if it's negeya to natia, you planted something, So too, maybe when you're building something, you have a chiyuv to root it out, or no. Maybe this is unique to Zerinatiyah. The problem is, if you look at the underlying svara, that it's a hana, which only comes after Shabbos. In such a case, are you mechuyev to put it back to where it was in Mitzvah Shabbos? So the place where there's clearly chiyuv is Zerinatiyah. There they will geyser it, you're mechuyev to rip it out. What about the railroad tracks? So there, it's similar to the Tiyan Zriya, that the Hana'ah, which comes out of the Avodah on Shabbos, is only after Shabbos when the Avodah is finished. And therefore, maybe it's not similar to the Tiyan Zriya, and therefore, this issue of not only do you not allowed to use it, maybe you have to rip up the tracks, because as you do it being Eiker Natiyah, it's not similar to Eiker Natiyah, even though there are overlapping templates of where the fact that you're not being nan until afterwards and the issue is done. So when this thing started in the 80s and 90s, there was still there was a lot of discussion among the serious poskim here. I'm going to give you in the next 10 minutes a rundown of what they taina legabi this rekevet. Rav Shmuel David Munk, Mechaber of Pas Sadcha, and one of the Chashuv Rabbanim wrote a tshuva to the Pnei Menachem. So Menachem was the Ger Rebbe. He was a world-class Talmid Chacham. Some of you may know his son, Shal Alter, is a world-class Talmid Chacham. As a Maimer Musgar circulating around, there's a very gripping sirton, which is a short video of a discussion between Shal Alter and Dave Landau, two of the greater Talmid Chacham of the Dar. Someone sent it to me yesterday, and it's actually one of the few things it's worth watching on a video. So the Pnei Menachem asked, what do we do about this rekevet? So I need a heter here. Is it mutter? And please come up with a heter. So Rav Munkel is a serious paisik, came up with various heterim. First of all, he says you're not actually being nana from the guf of the davar. It's not a real hana. When you're mevashal b'Shabbos, you're cooking something, you're being nana from the piece of meat. What is it? Hana here. Hana here is that at the end of the day, there is a train. So who says that's hana b'guf davar? Number one. Number two, the payalim, maybe they were shegigim. And then he comes up with a very interesting heter. He says, Lefirni is daiti, it's a new svar. He says, the Shas and I got to come up with a heter. So he says only one part of it obviously was brought on Shabbos, and we don't know which part was built in Shabbos. Go figure out which part was built in Shabbos. Not now. Maybe I said, I don't know why this is a heter. You go look in the central record, keep on a computer. Now you can figure out which was built in Shabbos. Not. But we don't know which part was built on Shabbos. If that's the case, l'chayra, it should be mutter Matzah Shabbos Chadei Yasu. At least you have to wait on Chadei Yasu, which of course raises the question of what's Chadei Yasu. But Moshe Sternbuch was asked this shaila, no surprise, and he's very upset about this. He says the Shilton in Eretz Yisrael was Machal Shabbos prefer Hesia when they hired Payalim to build this train and dig out the tunnels. And I was asked whether you're allowed to travel on this train. And next question is, if you are not, is the Israelite never go on this train? It's Asr love this b'mezid, or no? Is it only Sheyasa after Shabbos Kodesh? So he comes at it with another issue. The issue is, it's not possible. You can't go into somebody's backyard and be over to his tree and make it into a shera. Can't do that. The karka here that they're building on was karka that belonged to Eretz Yisrael. I'm not going into questions of who owns what under the rules of the Medina, but it belongs collectively to Klal Yisrael, and it's therefore Rishus HaRabim. They could have built this during the Chayil. They went ahead and they were Machal Shabbos in a karka or Rishus HaRabim. Says arguably they have no right to usher something which doesn't belong to them, and therefore I can't tell you that's usher l'olam. However, it clearly should be usher b'chtei sheyasu. And what's the question? And how do you calculate b'chtei sheyasu? So Rav Moshe Sternbuch has a problem with how to calculate this. In the end of it, he says you have to at least wait the zman of the time that you are gaining in the rakevet through the chafiris of Shabbos. Whatever time you gained because they worked in Shabbos, that, if not, they would have not dug this out in Shabbos. It would have taken longer by several months. Who knows? I don't know, maybe a year, because it took a long time. And there were long cost and time overruns. So he says, is that what you gained that was done on Shabbos? He understands himself that this is a very difficult calculation. He says, if you ain't under Yodim, how long it was done and how much it was done earlier because of Shabbos. He says, Shin Chaf Hey, Siv Zayim, in the Mishnah, Brura applies. And Shin Chaf Hey, Siv Zayim, the Brura has a kula. The Brura says that misafek, in a case of a suffix that we don't know exactly what the specific Isser is, nor do we know the time, Mishnah Brura says, in such a case, misafek, we are meko. And you do not need, in a suffix, how long you have to wait to B'chtei Sheyasa, meaning you don't know whether it was done by a guy or a Jew. So in a case where it's a makom suffix, Ikar Adin, says the Mishnah Brura, you have to wait Sheyasa, Shas Chak, you're allowed to be Mekel. Says Rav Moshe Sternbach, in this case, I have to be Machem the suffix, and therefore I'm going to ask you to wait the longest period of time. That is B'chtei Sheyasa, and only B'shas Chak Gadol Yesh L'Hakol. What's a Shas Chak to take a train? What's not a Shas Chak? And finally, how to calculate the B'chtei Sheyasa. Not clear in this tshuva, and it remains open. Finally, two more. I'm going to go a little bit over time, and I'll apologize, knowing that people have to go. Unser Rebbe, Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein. This is one of the places that I was aiming on this question. In the kuntras that he gives out to us on the Archikala called Vave Halmudim, which is published periodically and contains his psakim, which later end up in his svara. And his svara was also very upset by the fact that there were buildings for Kevet and Shabbos. He also starts with the svara that a person cannot aser somebody else's thing, but he quotes from this in Karelitz, who also said, I don't even know what the heter is. Teretz is a person can't aser somebody else's karka, which is used for shimush of the tzibur. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, those who are not Shamar Torah mitzvahs, who are going to do malach on Shabbos, so you have to wait B'chtei Sheyasa. And he quotes the Minchas Yitzchak, which says in the case of the Nesiya and the autobus, there's no heter of the Magen Avraham, and Einam Chaytav Leilai, you have to wait B'chtei Sheyasa. It says, Chol Shkeim Binyanenu. There are a lot of goyim here. And the paradox here is that they said, okay, we're going to use goyim. The goyim take away the Chil Hashem aspect of Jews working for Hesed and Shabbos. But that doesn't take away the issue of a goy producing Hanav for you in Shabbos, which is more common than Maaseh Shabbos. More common than Maaseh Shabbos. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, the fact that they use goyim clearly creates the requirement to wait. As we know in the Paiskim say there's a difference. Amir Lakim is more chomer, and you have to wait. So what do you do? So he says, you have to wait. How do you calculate this? This is a big problem. He says something which took years to build, which took place over many, many years, and we can't know exactly what there was so many takolas, and Mr. Gottesman says maybe the reason it was takolas is because they were not Shem Shabbos. You have to wait. And he says, Balavachi, there's a tremendous Chal Shema, V'chil Shema for Hesia. It's a danger to go on the train. You have to say Tfilah Sederech. And he says, it's a royu for Yarei Hashem not to travel on those tracks that were built in Shabbos, B'chtei Sheyasa, and it leaves open the calculation of how we get to B'chtei Sheyasa. The Rishon LeTzion, Yitzchak Yosef, son of Rav Avadia, was mater. And he says, the Pale themselves, if they're Jews, so it was done b'shviloi, b'mezid, it's asur le'alamis. But for everybody else, Medina the Gemara, Medina the Shulchan Aruch, even if mevashel b'mezid avur acherev, it's mutter after Matzah is Shabbos, and therefore even though the kavana of the paylim was for the tzibur rachav, we can't aser it bana, and Vachla Maisi says it is mutter. There's another last heter I'll just mention, recently promulgated by a HaRav, Tzvi HaKoyen. He wrote a tshuva in this, it was printed, I found in Maria. And he says when Perka Oil are built something that was Nenem Maaseh Shabbos, it's not possible to Asaros, because the whole svara of the Israel Acherim is in a place where that if you're not going to tell them, there'll be a Hana Maisav. Here, it doesn't. The templates of the nicer Kalim discuss that they're not going to be Nena. Doesn't apply, because here it's a Hana Maisav, because Chilayim are going to take this train in Shabbos. So what's the point of this Knas for us? B'lav Hasi, B'lav Hachi, a Hana Maisav. They accomplished what they wanted to do. Therefore, in such a case, we have no Brera, and we are matter. In other words, matara of Knas is to cancel those who do a Maaseh Shabbos, and to include a Acherim, not to be Nene for their Maasehs, and they'll see and they'll stop. Here they won't stop, because their whole matara is the Misrad Tachbora, is to build trains, and therefore they're not going to stop if we tell them that it's usher, and we won't take it on Maaseh Shabbos. So they keep on building it for everybody else. So in such a case, there really is no reason to us to cancel ourselves. It's Svara B'Chodesh, it's an aggressive Svara. You can look it up in Maria, Shvat Tafshin Pei, which I saw very recently. Let's sum up the Tram here by Sai. Heter number one is Rav Munk Seter. It's not a Hanoi Mamish, similar to the Chaya Adam. It's only a Shmira Mehezek that should not go, and therefore it's mutter. Second, and he also says that only a Chelik was built in Shabbos. We don't know which was built, and therefore somehow, doesn't say Bittul Barai, but somehow it should be mutter. The third is from Sternbach to Gottesman, all saying that people have no right to build in my karka and aser my karka. The heter I just mentioned from Tzvi HaKoyen, when people are Misra Tachbora is building specifically that people should be Nana and Shabbos, there's no reason for this knas, because the knas doesn't accomplish anything. Maybe according to the Chazon Ish and the Bnei Tzion, they were built by Tinoikos Shenishba. And according to both Moshe Stern and Gottesman, you have to wait before you can use this train B'chdei Sheyasa. Is it now B'chdei Sheyasa? Probably, because years have passed. Is the Rakevet HaKala and Yerushalayim creating this problem all over again? Absolutely. And therefore, we have the same problem. They're building in Shabbos, and therefore, the same analysis has to be applied to this.